Hello class. So we are looking at China limits European contact. Now we're not looking at the whole chapter, we're just going to be focusing on the Ming Dynasty this week. So in China, we learned about this in our first term. We had the Mongols. Now the Mongols had taken over China at this time. What ends up happening is we have this one man, Hong Wu. He ends up chasing the Mongols out of China at this time. And he establishes a new dynasty. He establishes the Ming Dynasty. Now Hong Wu, he is actually a peasant. He's not from the rich class. So a peasant, he sort of leads an army, chases out the Mongols. Remember, we've talked about the Mongols at the Yuan Dynasty, and becomes the first emperor of the Ming Dynasty. Now Hong Wu, he did not want to have any influence from outside world. Part of the reason for this is they had just chased out the Mongols, and they viewed the Mongols as sort of outsiders coming into China and taking over. So he wants to control the Ming Dynasty and make sure that the Ming Dynasty is prosperous. One way he's able to do this is he increases rice production. The way that he produces rice production is through irrigation. Now irrigation, this is a farming technique. It basically allows to have more water sort of trapped in a field by digging ditches. Okay, so that's the first thing that Hong Wu supports, is more rice production for the people. The next thing is that they sort of get rid of anything that was Mongol, and they return back to Confucian ideals. Now Confucianism is sort of a belief system that many people in China follow. In fact, many people in China still follow it today. And it believes in sort of a high moral establishment in government. It believes that everyone needs to work together to sort of make government and state a good place to live. He also restores civil service. Now, civil service, the way that he does this is he basically wipes out anything to do with Mongol government. But what often happens with wiping out a government is actually purging a government. So he kills thousands of people who are in the Mongol government or the Yuan government. He destroys the government and starts over, looking at civil service from before, during the Tang and Song dynasty. He's also establishing again this Confucian idea in government. Of course, he's doing this in sort of a horrible way by killing thousands of people. The other thing that starts to happen is we have, during the Ming Dynasty, Ming receives tribute. Now, tribute is sort of money and goods from other Southeast Asian countries. Now, the reason why they're receiving tribute is because they're starting to explore a little bit. So while initially Hong Wu is sort of closing off the border of the Ming Dynasty, he does allow people, Chinese, to go out and sort of explore on behalf of China. They do end up running into the Europeans. Now we learned last class that Portugal had already expanded to the Malay Peninsula. These are the types of Europeans that they're running into. So while China is actually receiving money and goods from people like the Malaysian people, as well as Vietnamese and people who are living in Thailand, they also expect that these Europeans who are starting to trade in the southeast, they also expect them to pay tribute to the Ming Dynasty. Now, of course, Europeans will do nothing of the sort. If we can remember, the one thing that Europeans are known for is they do think that they have a right to sort of take ownership of trade. And they don't believe that they view Chinese people as lesser than themselves. This is a very negative thing, of course. Okay, so we sort of have Europeans are not paying tribute, which will sort of upset the Chinese. The last thing we have is this man named Song Yonglo. Song Yonglo, he is actually the son of Hong Wu. One thing we should note about Hong Wu is while Hong Wu keeps the Ming capital in Nanjing, which is where the Mongols' capital was, Song Yonglo, he actually ends up moving the capital to Beijing. Okay, this will be a little bit important when we talk about this later. The other thing that Song Yonglo is well known for is he actually launches exploration of Southeast Asia. Okay, this is actually something that is quite new to China. They have not explored much because China has sort of kept into their own country. So here we have is Hong Wu. As you can see, he's a very robust man. That means he's a little bit of a chunky, chubby man. Okay, this is the first emperor of the Ming Dynasty, and he's a very important man. So we just talked about Yonglo, Song Yonglo, who is Hong Wu's son. He ends up taking over as the second emperor of the Ming Dynasty, and he wants more exploration on behalf of China. And the way he does this is he actually has this man, Zheng He. I might be mispronouncing that, but I'm trying my best. So Zheng he ends up leading 7 voyages around Asia. So on these 7 voyages, he has 40 to 300 ships. That's over 27,000 men in total. So this man, he's sort of one of China's first and only explorers around Asia. He goes to more than 16 countries and sends tribute, which is money and goods, back to the Ming Dynasty. So while Zheng He is off exploring, he fills up a boat with gold and other things, and he brings it back to the Ming emperors. And they sort of get to see what these other countries are giving them. This is actually very similar to what's happening with Portugal as well. In 1433, though, we end up having an end of this exploration, and China starts to draw back into isolation. And the reason this means that they're stopping all exploration. This is because they start to get worried about some of the outside powers, Europe being one of the big powers that they're worried about. They only open 3 ports in all of China. Now, if we think of China, China is a huge country. There are only 3 ports. That means places where ships can come in and actually trade with the Ming Dynasty. The reason they only have 3 ports is because they're trying to control what kind of foreign trade is coming into China. If they had more ports, it would be harder to control what is being traded. Another reason is what ends up happening is while most of Europe is starting to industrialize, China does not industrialize because they are controlling their trade so heavily. Since they don't really want to control with Europe, or they don't want to trade with Europe, they end up not really gaining some of the technology that Europe has developed. So as we see, one reason why China ends up also cutting off is commerce, which is sort of the trade and economy. It actually goes against China's Confucian beliefs. Now remember, Hong Wu, he reestablishes what Confucian beliefs are in China. So this idea of exploration goes against that. They don't believe that is for the betterment of the country. Okay? They believe it's more of a selfish pursuit. The last thing that sort of happens, and the last thing we'll focus on today, is we also have the visitors of Christian missionaries. We have the first Christian missionaries coming to China. And the first man is Matteo Ricci, and he is a Jesuit. Now, if you remember, a Jesuit is a part of the Catholic Church. It was a part of the reforms that the Catholic Church made during the Reformation. Now, Jesuits, if you remember, are ones that really stress reading the Bible and promoting education. So we're starting to see some Jesuits in China as well. So here we have some of the routes that Zheng He takes. So as you can see, Zheng He, this is the Ming Empire at the moment. It actually includes Vietnam, which is today Vietnam. He actually travels up north. He travels all the way to Australia, as we see here. And now, of course, this map is a little bit off. He's traveling down, going to Indonesia. Okay. He's even traveling to parts of what would be today known as Thailand and the Malay Peninsula, which would be Malaysia. If we travel along, he's traveling all the way to India, okay, and here, which is Sri Lanka. He actually travels all the way to the Middle East. So we see that Zheng He is traveling even to parts of Arabia, where the Muslims are, and down the east coast of Africa. So if you think that Zheng He is actually traveling this way from China, around the same time that Vasco da Gama from Portugal is traveling the opposite way towards India. Okay, so we're going to have some overlap between Portuguese explorers and Zheng He. Here's an example of a Chinese boat. It's a little fuzzy, but you can still get the idea of how many sails that these Chinese boats have. Now, I will say this, that the Chinese boats are not as advanced as Portuguese caravel. But it was more advanced than some of the other European countries at the time. What happens, just to note that Yongle, who is Hongwu's son, he's the one who sort of expands exploration, but he also moves the capital to Beijing. And what he does is he's the man who starts to build the Forbidden Palace. Now, we know the Forbidden Palace. It is a part of what we think of when we look at Beijing. But one thing we should note is that no commoners and foreigners were allowed to go into the palace. It was just for the rich and noble Chinese. Okay, and there's a part of the palace where no one was allowed to go except the emperor. What ends up happening to the Ming Dynasty is we eventually have the Manchus people. They invade China, and which marks the end of the Ming Dynasty and the start of the Qing Dynasty. This is just something that's important that you need to know, that the Qing Dynasty comes after Ming. Here's an example. This is the Forbidden Palace. This is built during Yongle when he moves the capital to Beijing. Now, the capital has not moved since Yonglu's time. The capital of China is still Beijing today. And this actually is one of the most important buildings in Beijing as well. Okay, so part of your homework for when I see you on Friday is I'd like you to compare Portugal and Ming's exploration. So what you can do is in your notebook, you're going to draw these two circles. And on one side, you're going to put Portugal. And on the other side, you're going to put Ming. And you're going to tell me how are they different and how are they similar. Okay? I'll see you guys on Friday. We'll talk a little bit more about the Ming Dynasty.